in my work, beginning with Rise of the Creative Class, is that when we tend to think of economic development, when we think about making our towns grow, and I'd been a professor of economic development, as Al mentioned, I taught at various universities, I did a PhD. I used to believe that if you wanted to do economic development, you had a traditional toolkit. You went around and you tried to lure companies, and you used tax and financial incentives to do that. And what I got to understand, having lived in Pittsburgh, and in fact, something in Pittsburgh happened that was very, very instrumental to my thinking. I lived in Pittsburgh. I moved there in the 1980s. It was a declining industrial town. The city fathers had to rebuild that town. It was really down on its luck. Lost 150,000 manufacturing jobs. Saw its population go from 900,000 to 300,000. And we decided to embark on a model of generating economic growth by creating new high-tech spin-off companies. We had great research and development laboratories, high-tech companies. We had great universities. And the idea was if we brought them together, we could create new high-tech spin-offs and cluster them together like they do in areas like the San Francisco Bay Area. And we created a lot of great companies there. And one company in particular we created is a company called Lycos. It was one of the first companies in the internet space. It was one of the companies that was organizing information on the internet. And when, as Al mentioned, I went off to teach at Harvard and was teaching there one day in the mid-1990s, watching Lycos grow back in my hometown, I picked up the morning paper and read a headline that really changed my thinking. Because the headline read, "Lycos to move to Boston." And when I researched that, when I talked to the people at Lycos, when I called the people back at Carnegie Mellon University, what they told me didn't fit in to what I had known and what I believed. The mayor of Boston was offering no tax incentives, no financial incentives. There was not a big financial package on the table. In fact, Boston was a much higher cost of business location in terms of taxes and fiscal policy. It was a more difficult regulatory environment, tougher land use and environmental controls. And the reason Lycos was moving from Pittsburgh, where it had been born, to Boston was for one reason: to get access to a talented, knowledgeable, and creative group of people that were already living in Boston. And that puzzled me. That puzzled me deeply. Because all my life I had believed, I had known, I had written articles, I had taught my students that if you want to grow your economy, you create jobs. And if you create these good, high-paying, high-tech jobs like Lycos had, and you create them in a place like my hometown, Pittsburgh, the people will move there. And in fact, that's what the theory said. If you create these good, high-paying, high-tech jobs, people will automatically go where they make the most money. But not in the case of Lycos, and not in the case of Pittsburgh. Instead of the people moving to the jobs like they were supposed to, in this case, the jobs were moving to the people. And it didn't make any sense to me. At that time in my life, I just simply couldn't understand it. So, and it kept me awake at night. Why? Why were the people not going to the jobs? Why were the jobs going to the people? You know, and economists don't believe this. Still to this day, they think this is heretical, and I take criticism for this because this isn't supposed to happen. If you have the good, high-paying jobs, no matter where they are, the people will come. So I tossed in bed at night, and I stayed awake. And I started to think about this, and I tried to put it together, and I couldn't figure it out. And then I went back to Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh in the fall, and, well, Sarah was in my class, and she remembers. She was a student there. And I started to ask my students, because I couldn't figure out this puzzle. I started to ask my students, when you graduate university, what kind of job do you want? What kind of work do you want to do? Where do you want to live? And the answers that came back were shocking. It wasn't about making the most money. It was about finding places that these young people wanted to be in. It was finding places that were, you know, this word energy kept coming. I want to go to a place that has energy. I want to go to a place that's exciting. I want to go to a place that's, for many of them, environmentally sustainable. I want to go to a place that allows me to be me and raise the kind of family I want. And you know, one student in that class said something that I just couldn't believe. I was trying, you know, we used to call it a knowledge economy or the information age or the high-tech community, industrial clustering. And one of the students in that class said something that was quite surprising to me. We're talking about what do you do, how do you see yourself, where do you want to move? And you know, do you see yourself as a knowledge worker? What's a knowledge worker? Do you see yourself as an information technology person? What's that? And one student said, you know, I like information technology. I work on these geographic information systems and maps, and I like software programming. After all, it was an engineering university, Carnegie Mellon. She said, I'm very, very, very interested, and I care about the environment, and the environment is something I believe in, and I want to make it better. She said, but I also like music, and I have a little DJ thing I do in the off hours. She said, I guess I'm just a creative person. And every student in that class just started to nod. No matter what they did, if they studied public policy or management, if they were working on technology, working on software, every student just nodded, I guess I'm just a creative person. And then I said, well, maybe I should try to write a book on this. Maybe I should try, and it took a long time. I started to just write down notes and describe this and work with other people to research it. And you know, it's been a long time now. It's been nearly 10 years. Rise of the Creative Class, Flight of the Creative Class, Cities in the Creative Class, and this new book. Well, like Al said, I'm a professor, which means I could talk forever. And we only have a limited time for me to share my ideas and then to take some questions from you. So I want to tell you the 3 or 4 really, really big things. The really, really big things we've learned in that decade worth of work. The first one that we learned, and it took me a long time to put this together, we are living through the greatest economic transformation in all of human history. It's happening all around us. It's hard to understand. It's quite disruptive. It's changing everything we do. The shift in our economy and society that we are going through is bigger in scope and in magnitude and in nature than the shift our grandparents and great-grandparents went through when our economies changed from an agriculture to an industrial society. Now think about that just for a minute. When we shifted from an agricultural mode of production to an industrial mode of production, we created great wealth. We created great cities, gargantuan cities. We built tremendous industries in Australia, in the United States, and in Europe. People migrated from their small farming towns and took up homes. My grandparents moved from Italy to take up work in the eastern coast of the United States. We created great wealth. There was the rise of tremendous new wealth. But the disruptions of that time, the tumultuous nature, we forget. We had fabulously wealthy people and an absolute underclass of working people and non-working people. We saw people's lives disrupted as they were forced off their farms. It's the kind of times that Karl Marx wrote about, great class struggles. Charles Dickens, poverty. And you know, it took a long time. It took 50 or 100 years to build an industrial society. You did it in Australia. We did it in the United States. We called it a New Deal in the 1930s. My dad, and I'll tell you more about him, who only had an 8th grade education and worked in a factory all of his life, had enough money to buy a home and put his 2 boys through college. We're going through an even deeper transformation today. It's a bigger one. It's a shift from an industrial style of economy to one I call a creative economy. It's bigger because what we do now has changed, and for the first time in human history, it's changed in a deep and fundamental way. In every other kind of economy, we created wealth from natural resources, fertile soil, great agricultural areas, river deltas and river basins, by pumping out raw materials and natural resources. You have them in Australia, we had them and have them in North America. And we combined physical labor power with natural resources to build wealth. We built great ports, we built great factories. But the source of economic growth was physical. Now, with the rise of China and India and Asia and Mexico, many of those things that can be done physically have been moved to lower cost locations. The real source of economic growth of our time has shifted from physical labor to the human mind.